So, Elon Musk is at the center of a desperate fight over quelling speech in the country of Brazil. This confrontation centers around issues of censorship, free speech, and the regulation of social media platforms in that country, particularly in the context of combating so-called disinformation. There have been many twists and turns for this story, but what we're going to focus on today is the attempt by the Brazilian government to suspend sitting members of their own parliament, as well as major journalists from the Twitter X platform who have dared to speak out against their own government. You see, there's a corrupt justice, Alexandre de Moraes, who has been a prominent figure in Brazil's efforts to combat what their propaganda machine has labeled disinformation and hate speech on social media platforms. In recent years, you see, he has ordered the suspension of several Twitter accounts suspected of spreading this so-called disinformation. These actions are part of a broader crackdown on free speech in Brazil, with Moraes leading the charge here. There can be no mistaking what we're seeing. There is a sprint towards tyranny that the country is headed towards, much like what we are starting to see here in the US and of course in Canada and many parts of Europe. The mask that these radical leftists and progressives have been wearing, the one where they pretend to abide by a legal democratic system, is fast slipping away. Now, Moraes' efforts have included blocking accounts of influential figures, most of whom are supporters of the right-wing president Jair Bolsonaro. Now, Bolsonaro himself has been declared ineligible to run for office in the future by the Superior Electoral Tribunal, or the TSE. And this is led by Moraes. The excuse that they are using to eliminate him from running for office in the future was because he disseminated what they say is false information about Brazil's electoral system. Essentially, he's arguing that the electronic system is compromised, to put it nicely. Which then takes us to the conflict between Elon Musk, who owns Twitter. He has publicly refused to comply with Brazilian censorship demands. Musk's refusal came after a Supreme Court judge in Brazil ordered an investigation of him for criticizing the magistrate and accusing him of censorship for blocking social media accounts suspected of spreading so-called disinformation. Judge Moraes has accused Elon Musk of criminal instrumentalization of the platform and is threatening to impose fines and potentially cut off access to the platform in Brazil. Now, Musk has taken a strong stance against these demands, arguing that principles matter to him more than profit. He has criticized Judge Moraes for betraying the Constitution and the people of Brazil and suggested that Moraes should resign or be impeached. Here is how this unfolded as reported by Michael Schellenberger.
Hey everyone, it's Mike Schellenberger, and I'm reporting to you at this moment from Brazil, where a dramatic series of events are underway. At 5:52 p.m. Eastern Time today, April 6, 2024, X Corporation, formerly known as Twitter, announced that a Brazilian court had forced it to, quote, block certain popular accounts in Brazil. Then, less than 1 hour later, the owner of X, Elon Musk, announced that X would defy the court's order and lift all restrictions. As a result, said Musk, we will probably lose all revenue in Brazil and have to shut down our office there. But principles matter more than profit, he added. At any moment, Brazil's Supreme Court could shut off all access to X Twitter for the people of Brazil. It is not an exaggeration to say that Brazil is on the brink of dictatorship at the hands of a totalitarian Supreme Court justice named Alexandre de Moraes. President Lula da Silva is also participating in this push towards totalitarianism. Since taking office, Lula has massively increased government funding of the mainstream corporate news media, most of which are encouraging increased censorship. What Lula and de Moraes are doing is an outrageous violation of Brazil's constitution as well as the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. At this moment, Brazil is not yet a dictatorship. It still has elections, and the Brazilian people have other means at their disposal to confront authoritarianism. At the same time, the federal Supreme Court and the Superior Electoral Court, which it controls, are directly interfering in those elections through censorship. 3 days ago, I arrived in Brazil and published the Twitter files for Brazil. They show that de Moraes has violated the Brazilian constitution in multiple ways. He illegally demanded that Twitter reveal private information about Twitter users who used hashtags that he considered inappropriate. He demanded access to Twitter's internal data, violating the platform's policy. He censored on his own initiative without any respect for due process, posts on Twitter by parliamentarians from the Brazilian Congress. And Moraes tried to turn Twitter's content moderation policies into a weapon against supporters of then-President Jair Bolsonaro.
And here is Elon Musk explaining the final straw that pushed him to refuse to suspend accounts in Brazil.
Demands from this Judge Alexander, that's his name on Twitter, at Alexander, and there would be to suspend accounts immediately. We were given typically 2 hours to suspend an account or face massive fines, and the final straw is we were being given demands to suspend sitting members of the parliament and major journalists. And moreover, we could not tell them that this was at the behest of Alexander Morales. We had to pretend that it was due to our rules of service. And that was the final straw, and we said no.
Now, Musk's refusal to comply with the censorship demands has led to a public and heated exchange between him and the Brazilian authorities, with Musk vowing to fight the order and even challenging Moraes to a public debate. In response to this, Brazil's Attorney General Jorge Messias has called for urgent regulation of social networks. This is raising the alarm that the fascist style of control by this government is increasing. The radical left, you see, these progressive socialist types, like this corrupt judge, have long sought a way to corrupt free speech. It has always been a thorn in the side of those who want tyranny, those who want power. They don't like free speech. And one of the ways they have corrupted this is with the idea of hate speech and hate crimes, which, to give them credit, was an ingenious move. It allowed them, these socialist leftists, to plant the seeds of tyranny that we are now seeing blooming across the world. So why is it that many of the citizens of Brazil believe that their election was stolen and that their election system is compromised? Well, you can trace this all back to the former president Bolsonaro and his supporters, who have repeatedly made claims that the integrity of Brazil's electronic voting system is compromised. He has suggested that the electronic voting system is flawed and susceptible to fraud. These claims have been echoed by his supporters both within Brazil and beyond. Now, Bolsonaro's campaign against the electronic voting system began well before this most recent election in 2022 in Brazil. As far back as 2018, when he first won the presidency, Bolsonaro claimed that fraud had prevented him from winning in the first round of voting. His administration even tasked the federal police with investigating their electronic voting system, but no evidence of fraud was ever officially found. Now, despite this, Bolsonaro has continued to attack the system's reliability, even attempting to introduce legislation for printed vote receipts, which was, by the way, rejected. I mean, why would you want to go back to a voting system where fraud on a large scale would be more difficult, right? Now, this would end up leading to massive protests, particularly after the election did not go his way in 2022. This would escalate into a fevered pitch leading up to January 8th of 2023, when thousands of Bolsonaro supporters stormed key government buildings in Brasilia. This included the Congress, Supreme Court, and presidential offices. This is why, by the way, I believe that all electronic voting systems need to be eliminated immediately, and a return to paper ballot systems with IDs and signatures should be required. Anyone who argues against this is either misinformed of the dangers and risks that electronic voting systems pose or are themselves outright corrupt. There is only one positive reason that I can even think of for considering electronic voting systems, and that is the so-called efficiency of the process. But it seems to me, at least here in the US, ever since we went to electronic ballots, things have only been further muddled and the process has slowed down. Plus, it opens the door for ever louder cries of corruption in the electoral process. People need to believe in your system. Which brings me to the transparency and verifiability, and why paper ballots, you gotta go back to them. I'll explain. You see, paper ballots provide a human-readable record of voters' choices. These can be audited. They can be verified independently of electronic systems. They're also resistant to, cyber threats. Paper ballots are not subject to the same cyber vulnerabilities as electronic systems. Paper ballots enhance public confidence in the electoral process. They provide that tangible record of votes. And they're a lot harder to corrupt, at least on a mass scale. Can it be done? Of course, but it's harder to do. And when we're talking about electronic systems, there's obviously the vulnerability, the security risks. They're susceptible to hacking, to cyber attacks, and other security threats. While paper ballots, on the other hand, is all about the tangible and auditable record of votes. This is all about enhancing the integrity and transparency of the electoral process. I honestly don't understand how there can even be an argument on this matter, especially considering all the accusations of Russia here in the US, the fraud. Why not go back to a system that is harder to compromise? When you're talking about something as precious as our freedoms and our ability to be self-governed, there really should never be a discussion on this. And why all of this matters, my friends, is the fight for freedom is in full swing now in most Western democracies and representative republics. Those who subscribe to tyrannical control over their populations, and I'm talking about the socialists, the communist-leaning parties, have been emboldened in recent years to grab massive amounts of power over their peoples. Corrupting voting systems and censoring speech of the masses is the quickest way to achieve their end. But thankfully, more and more people are waking up to this reality. The desire to strangle freedom and dominate populations has finally been unmasked in a way that more and more average citizens just can't ignore any longer. And the pushback has been growing. You can see it all over Europe with the farmer protests. You've got it here in the States. People are finally starting to awaken to the severe danger that we are all in. Not since the height of the Cold War have we seen free societies at a greater point of risk. This growing socialist communist corruption threatens to consume all of the free countries of the world, which would leave nothing but darkness and tyranny for most people in its wake. Now, whether or not the awakening of the public at large will be in time, well, that remains to be seen.